DawgNation, and welcome back to DawgNation at Large. I'm Kaylee Mansell with Connor Riley, and I want to start out today's show by congratulating the greatest athlete of all time, Simone Biles, on winning her 6th Olympic gold medal, second all-around, 9 total. She breaks a record that's 120 years old, most gymnastics gold medals in American history. I thought she deserved a shout-out on today's show.
We're going to start this on the wrong foot, but there's no world where she's the greatest athlete of all time. She's not the greatest. She's an incredible gymnast. No disrespect to her. Mm-hmm. But I'm sorry. I just can't have her ahead of Michael Phelps.
I thought you might say that. So I came with another argument. She has 5 gymnastics skills named after her because no one else can do them. When I think about the greatest of all time, I think about the part that says athlete. I'm not trying to take away credit from Michael Phelps by any means. But what Simone Biles has been able to do in 4 events that are completely different from one another, that's athleticism to me. Floor, vault, beam, bars, they don't really have any overlap. They're completely separate events, but yet she's able to dominate almost all of them. I think that ties back into the athlete, athleticism. I state my case.
Do you want to discuss what happened at the 2021 Tokyo Olympics?
Listen,
or are we not allowed? Are we not allowed to bring that up?
I also thought you would bring this up, so I'm here to say that you think that Michael Jordan is the greatest athlete of all time. I know this because you have told me before. He also quit basketball for a period of time. Yes, to play another sport,
he never lost in the finals.
Two experiences are comparable. She's also won 30 world championships. I mean, the numbers. That's all I'm going to say. She deserves a shout out.
You can say what you want, but I'm just saying from an Olympic standpoint, I know you were a little young when Michael Phelps won 8 for 8 at the Beijing Olympics, but I still think that's the most impressive single performance at any Olympics. And so as great as Simone is, again, not taking anything away from her, I still recognize Michael Phelps as my GOAT Olympic athlete of all time.
We're only a minute and a half in, and the age card has already been pulled, and that is a staple here on DawgNation at Large.
It's the show for the new breed of Georgia Bulldog fan. This is DawgNation at Large with DawgNation insiders Connor Riley and Kaylee Mansell.
All right, DawgNation, this is DawgNation at Large, a show where we talk all things Georgia football and sometimes other things like the greatest athlete of all time. And we're going to do some Olympics coverage today. Let's go ahead and start with what we've got going on today's show. Fall training camp started today. Our very own Connor Riley was there to see it. What did we learn from today about the team? And then it seems like it's been a merry-go-round with UGA and USC on the recruiting trail. We know it can be really confusing, so we're going to give you a full timeline breakdown of when it began and where it's going. Also, too, like I said, we're going to do some Olympics coverage, including Kirby Smart making time pre-fall camp and during recruiting season to surprise an UGA Olympian. And then we're going to have our very own Dawg Olympics. But let's go ahead and start with fall camp. Connor, you were there at the first day of training camp. What was the vibe?
Yeah, a little bit of surprise coming out of the start. Obviously, Kirby Smart today dismissing Ra Thomas from the team and then focusing on the guys that are going to be here in 2024. We knew that Jordan Hall was injured. I don't think we knew that there was a stress fracture, of his tibia. Warren Brinson's dealing with an Achilles injury here, and you have Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins still working his way back from a foot injury. All 3 of those guys were thought to be very important contributors to Georgia this year. And Kirby Smart said about Michael Williams at SEC Media Days, when you're not 100% healthy in fall camp, you tend to not have your best season. Georgia needs probably all 3 of those guys this year to have their best seasons at Georgia. If this defensive line is going to get to where they want to go and ultimately get this team to where they want to win national championships. Now, in comparison to everyone else, Georgia's got a really good defensive line, but Georgia's not compared to everyone else on the defensive line. Georgia is the standard on the defensive line. And for them to get back there, they need to be healthy, in addition to having some of the young players that Kirby Smart spoke about today make significant leaps moving forward.
So here just a little bit, we're going to break down all the Kirby quotes that came out of the press conference today, but you actually got to attend the first 15 minutes of practice. Was that it?
We did.
Okay,
we did.
Walk us through what that was like, because that's not something that we get to just do every single day.
I mean, there's a very good chance this might be the only time we get practice this fall, but they were out there in helmets. Again, this is one of those things where, because it's such a small sample size, because it's only 15 minutes of individual drills, it's hard to take big, wide, sweeping takeaways from it. A lot of times, you're just quite frankly looking out there to make sure that everyone is out there and you're more or less checking roll. I will say a guy that stood out to me, and I wrote about this in the practice report on DawgNation.com, Nate Frazier is different. Georgia has a lot of different body types at that running back position. We saw Branson Robinson back out there, no limitations. He looks noticeably slimmed down. You wonder how that's going to impact him. Kirby Smart was making it a point to push Trevor Etienne to be a strong leader in that running back room. And having said all that, Roderick Robinson looking thick as ever. Nate Frazier is a different type of running back. This is a guy who has some real juice at that position that Georgia hasn't maybe had in some time, maybe going back to really DeAndre Swift or early James Cook there at that running back position. And so I'm really interested in seeing how quickly he gets up to speed this year in terms of, what is he able to do? That Clemson game is going to be super interesting. Whether Trevor Etienne goes in that game or not, I'm interested in seeing how Nate Frazier goes about playing in that game, how Georgia uses him in that game. I was already sort of an interest there going into fall camp, and now getting a chance to see him on the practice field with pads on, that interest has been raised to a curiosity, and they have my attention.
Kirby actually addressed the purpose of fall camp, what it is that you're trying to get out of it. During the press conference, this is what he had to say earlier today.
What's our response going to be to the mental and physical adversity they face? I don't know that in spring practice you can simulate that. We try to simulate it in summer conditioning program, but it's not the same as having all these pads on, helmets on, equipment on, and I can't simulate the heat they're going to have with that equipment on. So I don't know how this team's going to respond to when stuff gets hard and stuff gets tough and guys start complaining to each other and they're not running and they're not getting to the ball and practice is tiring. But that's what camp is. Our introduction last night was very deep into why do you have a training camp? What is the purpose of a training camp? It's to build the toughness within our team.
You hear him there at the end. It's to build the toughness within our team. But I think for me, toughness can mean a variety of things. It can be mental, team building, physical. What is toughness to you in regards to how Kirby Smart uses it?
I mean, the easy thing is just getting through that heat. That August sun in Georgia is something fierce. But again, I think you hear Kirby Smart talk about it, and he sort of maybe poo-pooed the idea that this is going to be something where fall camp prepares Georgia for a longer season, which there's a chance this year that Georgia plays 17 games over the course of the 2024 season. I think that they know that this month is going to be used to build depth, and so much is going to be focused on this idea of what a position battle looks like, who starts at corner, who starts at left guard, etc. The reality is Georgia's going to need all those guys. They're going to need Michael Morse and Dylan Fairchild. They're going to need Julio Humphrey, Daniel Harris, and Ellis Robinson, in addition to Dalen Everett at that cornerback position. They're going to need to make the most out of the 85-man scholarship roster, because all those guys, as we've already seen in fall camp, some of those guys just pick up random injuries. That's just sort of the nature of the beast with a game as violent as football. And so you need to have as many of those players able to come in and help your team right away. And so I think that's why we gravitate towards freshmen like a KJ Bolden, like a Nate Frazier during this month, of how quickly are they getting up to speed, because it's not just for that Clemson game. And with Georgia having a tougher schedule this year, you're going to need your full 85-man roster to get through that. And Kirby Smart understands that better than anyone. And that's why this month of August, for a program that likes to make practice tougher than the games, it's so important that they have their toughest and best practices of the year during this month.
Yeah, I actually want to bring up a stat that Mike Griffith put out on DawgNation. It said that UGA has only lost 2 games under Kirby Smart when the heat's exceeded 80 degrees. But even in those 2 losses, it didn't seem like conditioning has never really been a factor that we've talked about or a weakness of this team. So it seems like whatever Kirby's having them do behind the scenes in fall practice is working.
Yeah, and look, this is a team that, quite frankly, Kirby Smart's teams haven't lost a lot of games in general. This is a program where, again, we cover it on such a nitpicky basis that, when I talk about the defensive line depth not being where it needs to be, or the wide receiver room now after Ra Thomas's dismissal being a little bit of concern, that's within the confines of this is a Georgia football program that has won 2 of the last 3 national championships. I'm not trying to compare them to what SAA Florida is doing, to what SAA Clemson is doing, because those programs, quite frankly, have different goals than what Georgia has. And so I think what makes Georgia different, what certainly made them different in those 2021 and 2022 seasons when they won a national championship, was that physicality, was that toughness. You think to the Michigan game in 2021, the Tennessee game in 2022. Those were talented teams, top 5 teams in the country when they played Georgia at that point in time. And Georgia just took their lunch money. And so that is something that is built, that is a mindset that is developed during this month of August. And that, more than anything, is going to be something that I think we see at some point during the 2024 college football season. And it starts today, in a day where it was about 95 degrees out, and Kirby Smart was pushing just as hard as he would as if it were Florida week in the middle of October.
So with the first day of training camp, one thing that always has to be addressed and acknowledged is we've got new injury updates. Kirby Smart spoke on this in his press conference earlier. Here's an updated injuries list and sound from Kirby Smart.
Warren Brenson's dealing with an Achilles tendon, so he'll be in and out. It's an opposite one of the one he had in spring, but it's not long. We injected it, and he should be back shortly. Marcus Harrison's dealing with a stress reaction on his foot, should be back shortly. Jordan Hall has a tibia stress fracture that we ended up having to do surgery on. We expect a full recovery. He'll be back hopefully by the first game, but he will be close. Ty Ingram is coming back from an injury that he's dealt with. He's not 100%, but he's close. Smile is able to do some stuff, not everything, but he's almost back. And then Chris Peel had a labral repair at the end of spring, so he'll be limited a little bit. Branson will start practice without limitations, but we will have some load management with him. And then Cole Spears dealing with a little bit of midfoot sprain. But you guys will see most of those guys that I've named involved in some way in practice. Some are just completely out, but others aren't.
All right, DawgNation, we know that was a lot of information, but luckily we've got it here all broken down for you. So to reiterate, when you look at it, what position group is affected most by this?
It's the defensive line there. We knew about Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins and his foot injury. We kind of knew about the extent of Jordan Hall's injury there. I'd be surprised if he plays against Clemson. Again, not a doctor, but surgery on a stress-fractured tibia doesn't exactly sound like something that's going to heal quickly. And then Warren Brinson, while it's not an Achilles tear, an Achilles injury is something to obviously manage and keep close to 100% there. And so I think with this defensive line, a position that is under more scrutiny, in my opinion, than almost any on this Georgia team, in addition to fielding questions about whether or not this position group is good enough, now has to deal with the aspect of, is it healthy? And so this group does impact what Georgia wants to do on its defensive side of the ball, because, if the numbers aren't great, maybe you move Michael Williams back from that outside linebacker position. But I think Georgia and Michael know that his most impactful position this year is going to come as an edge rusher there. So there's a lot that makes up this Georgia defense this year, and there's a lot that's riding on it. For the first time since 2018 last year, Georgia didn't rank in the top 5 in rush defense. That's an area they want to get back to. But if Warren Brinson's not healthy, if we don't see much from Jordan Hall, and Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins is still dealing with a foot injury, it's going to be hard for this defensive line, in my opinion, to help get Georgia's defense as a whole to where it needs to be.
So we're going to circle back around to the defensive line, but one of the names that stands out to me on that list is Smile Munden, who missed all of the spring as well for the same injury. Now, luckily, you've stated that you thought the linebacker position for this year's defense was one of the strongest position groups on the team, but as we've seen, is this something that we need to start being concerned about, or will he be able to come back at full health?
I mean, we know that Smile broke his foot at some point late last season. He missed the Florida State game because of that injury. So this has been a long-term recovery for him. And I think you saw last year, Smile was injured for most of that season, and I think that absolutely impacted his play there. There's also the lingering question of, is he going to be able to play in that game against Clemson, not from a physical standpoint, but because of his offseason arrest. I know Kaylee's tired of talking about it, but that racing arrest, that is something that we're going to have to keep in mind with that Clemson game. Kirby Smart said he's not going to announce anything when it comes to that regard, but I am going to be interested moving forward what his status looks like from an eligibility standpoint, much less a foot standpoint. We did see him out there at practice today. He was not wearing a black non-contact jersey, but Kirby, as you heard him say, is going to be a little bit limited there. And with that, that's going to open things up for guys like CJ Allen, Raylan Wilson, second-year players, Jalen Walker more at that inside linebacker position. I think as it stands right now, they're in a better spot now than they were a year ago with some of the questions at that inside linebacker room. But the Smile Monday topic is going to be something that I think dominates the month of August, as you point out, Kaylee, not just because of the suspension, but also because he is still dealing with this lingering foot injury, which has lasted for quite some time now.
I told you we would circle back around to the defensive line because, like you, I think that Coach Smart also recognizes that the amount of injuries also has an impact because, as he said before, you can't have enough people at the defensive line position. You got to have that depth. Here's what Kirby Smart had to say about that today.
Got to get the young guys ready to play. You never have enough defensive linemen. So just from the jump street, we got some big bodies in that room. We've got some inexperienced big bodies. So it's really important that we establish depth, that we're looking at a potentially longer season. And we have, I want to say it's 4 or maybe 5 new guys, meaning first year with us, because that includes a portal transfer and 4 high school guys that are 300 pounds or greater that haven't played a snap for us. And they will provide our depth in that room. That when guys get injured at that position, they got to be able to step in and play. And that's an area that we got to continue to develop and grow. I mean, everybody does. Nobody has enough of them.
I know that he does not want to have a guy in the rotation that's a first year with this team, but it looks like based on all the injuries, it's going to happen at some point. Who becomes that first year guy that gets in the rotation on the defensive line?
The easy answer here is Joseph Jonah Ajonye. I think he's the most physically impressive of Georgia's newcomers from the 2024 signing class. He just looks like a different type of athlete, a guy that I think can play a little bit on the end. If Tyrion Ingram Dawkins isn't 100%, I think he can also, if asked, kick inside a little bit there as well. The other guy to maybe keep an eye on here and has gone a little bit under discussed is Jordan Thomas, defensive tackle from New Jersey here. And we haven't really talked a whole lot about, was an under-the-radar recruit, but a guy that went through spring practice is a little bit farther physically along than, say, Nazir Johnson out of Dublin, Georgia there. I don't know if Nazir falls into the South Georgia or Central Georgia debate here, but that's another point for another day. But I think with Jordan Thomas, that's a guy where maybe he's worth following now, whereas I think coming into the season or even coming into the month of July, there was a lot of talk about Jordan Thomas maybe being a potential redshirt candidate. I think with the injuries that we've seen to Warren Brinson, to Jordan Hall, this is a guy that might be asked to play on the interior of that defensive line rather sooner than later.
So to kind of sum all of this up, now that day one is done, you heard what you heard from Kirby. You saw a glimpse of practice. What are going to be the biggest questions to answer until that Clemson game?
I think the important thing to keep in mind here with this Georgia team, and we talk about questions and things that need to be answered. This Georgia team is better than so many other teams out there. Like, they've got Carson Beck. He looked confident, calm, collected at that quarterback position. They're maybe not as deep at the wide receiver position as you'd like, but then you go out there and you see Dylan Bell practice. You hear Kirby rave about Dominic Lovett. You see Oscar Delp back out there and think, all right, they've got the weapons here. They've got the offensive line. Again, I think for Georgia, and this might be a bit of arrogance, this is a team that is worried, and I think this shows up in the month of August. This is a team that is worried about those games in November and December rather than necessarily that first game against Clemson. You know, they don't talk a whole lot about that first opponent when fall camp first kicks off. You're not going to hear a lot of Clemson chatter. We asked Tate Ratledge today, Dalen Everett, about the Clemson program, about the Clemson game. They didn't have a whole lot to say about that, and I think that's because they understand the importance of fall camp and what that means to this program over the course of the entire season and not just that first game.
So here in just a second, we are going to do a full breakdown of the timeline of the UGA versus USC battle on the recruiting trail. But first, we are so excited to announce our new partner here at DawgNation, none other than Zagoria Law. I know that you guys have heard us do our regular occurring segment, Dog Bites. So what we love about Zagoria Law is that they are the only law firm in the state that specializes in representing people bitten by dogs. Yes, you did hear me correct. They are the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. They literally wrote the book on how to win these cases. So if you or a loved one has been hurt by someone else's dog, make sure to give them a call at 833-GA-DOG-BITE or visit ZagoriaLaw.com. Again, that's 833-GA-DOG-BITE or visit ZagoriaLaw.com. Fun fact, I was actually bitten by my neighbor's dog, I think 8 or 9 years old, and it kind of scarred me for life, and I wish I would have known that I could have been compensated for it at the time, hence why, to this day, I love the dogs, like the DAWGS, but I'm definitely more of a cat person, so this would have been good to know at that time.
Wow. Kaylee, anti-dog.
I'm not
Very tough to
anti-dog,
hear.
but I am very pro-cat.
Anti-dog's what I hear.
It is what it is. Okay, so I've been excited to get to this and talk about it because this is just something that just when you think it can't get more interesting, it continues to do so. UGA versus USC, two schools that the only way that you can compare the two is by looking at their recruiting battles. And a lot has happened over the last year or so. So let's go ahead and break it down. Let me give you the timeline. In my mind, this is where it all kind of starts. When Bear Alexander on April 15th, 2023 decides that he's going to transfer to USC, but he does it on G-Day, maybe like an hour before the game starts. Now, I felt it was important to also include this, that on August 22nd, 2023, Juju Lewis, an in-state quarterback, the in-state quarterback that everyone wanted, but no one more than the UGA fan base wanted this kid, but he commits to USC, and shockingly enough, he's still committed to them. I don't know if that's going to be the case. I don't think it's UGA, but I did think it was important to note that there because I felt like Lincoln Riley took that as a major win. Let's go ahead and go to the next page, and then we'll tie this all back together. All right, so let's go to this year. On March 24th, USC flips Justice Terry and happens to land Isaiah Gibson. And then just a few months later, both Terry and Gibson decommit from USC within a 24-hour time period of one another. A few days after this happens, Isaiah Gibson commits to Georgia. Big W for the Dogs. And then, as of recently, UGA flips 2026 cornerback 4-star Dominic Kelly, and it seems like UGA is winning the battle. But then, what happens? Oh, what do you know? USC flips Georgia's longest tenured commit in the 2025 class, Jaden Perlotti. And then where we stand now, the next big one in line is that they are both in the top 3 for 5-star defensive lineman, Elijah Griffin. There's the timeline. We have a lot to break down here. Connor, why? East Coast, West Coast. It doesn't. If it was like Ohio State or Alabama or even Tennessee, it would make a little bit more sense to me. But I mean, is this personal? Is it business? Where does it all begin in your mind?
Well, one, I think you can look at the fact that even before that timeline establishes the events there, you look at the Georgia program. Brock Bowers out of California, Kendall Milton out of the Fresno area, Ernest Green, Georgia starting left tackle this year, out of St. John Bosco there in the Los Angeles area. Nate Frazier, who we touched on earlier today, played for Mater Dei. Georgia has shown no qualms about going into California and getting players. Mm-hmm. And I think Lincoln Riley, and I actually give him some credit here. This is where maybe I zag from some people. I think Lincoln Riley has maybe started to realize that he needs to change his program and the way that he goes about doing things. And the last 3-4 seasons, no one has been better than the Georgia football program. And so I think Lincoln, to his credit, has been like, okay, we need to go head-to-head and start getting some of the guys that Georgia wants by whatever means. And look, we know distance is a factor. We're not going to be afraid to go into Georgia, just like Georgia's not going to be afraid to go into USC. And look, USC may not win all of these guys. Obviously, you've already seen Isaiah Gibson flip back. We'll see what Justice Terry does. Elijah Griffin, the name to watch there. But Lincoln Riley is going to keep going, and to use a Kirby Smart phrase, keep chopping wood. I think Lincoln understands that there is some real pressure on him now to start turning things around. The honeymoon phase is over there at USC after a disastrous season they had a year ago. And so they are starting to recognize and like, hey, let's just go out there and let's get the best talent. And if that means going head-to-head against Georgia and kicking a hornet's nest on the trailing Kirby Smart, so be it. But I'm trying to beat Kirby Smart on the field. And as Kirby Smart has said himself at various times, you have to beat him on the recruiting trail in order to beat him on the field. And so I think that's where it all sort of starts to stem from. In my mind, I actually think that this is Lincoln Riley showing an appreciation for what Kirby does and maybe saying, hey, let's go head to head and try to battle him and see if we can't win some of those and use some of the inherited advantages that USC has being the premier football school in Los Angeles and try and turn that program around, because he desperately needs to, because after last season, his runway is not as long as it maybe should be from when he arrived there from Oklahoma.
So what you're saying here, it's one of those cases that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery? Is that what I'm getting? Okay, now correct me if I'm wrong here. The last time that these two coaches actually went head-to-head on the field was the 2018 iconic Rose Bowl, correct? When he was at Oklahoma. Well, now it's interesting that these two keep coming into the conversation with one another, because there really hasn't been an opportunity for them to play on the field. So it feels like what they're doing in these recruiting battles is the only way that we have to compare these programs to one another.
Yeah, well, I think it's important here to note Lincoln Riley goes to Oklahoma, or leaves Oklahoma after it's announced that Oklahoma is going to join the SEC. And then after he gets there and thinks he's going to be at USC, potentially running the Pac-12 for some time, USC joins the Big Ten. And I think that changes the way that Lincoln Riley has gone about doing things and trying to change the way that he runs and operates his program. But Lincoln Riley and Kirby Smart, their backgrounds are actually very similar on an on-paper standpoint. Obviously, they have some key differences. But Lincoln Riley, his first job as a head coach, taking over for Bob Stoops at Oklahoma in 2017. Kirby Smart taking over as the head coach at Georgia for Mark Richt in 2016. Lincoln Riley, probably the best offensive mind of his time in terms of developing quarterbacks, in terms of consistently developing elite offenses. Kirby, probably the best defensive mind of his time, of his era there. And these two have gone head to head time and time again. Lincoln Riley has produced multiple Heisman Trophy winners, multiple first round picks, multiple number one overall picks. Kirby's got the stake, and Kirby's got the national championships there. And these two guys are contemporaries in that sense. And sure, they had some potential to match up against each other. That Oklahoma game in 2023 was scheduled to put these two against each other. Ultimately didn't end up happening. And the next time we see USC and Georgia play, it's going to have to be in a college football playoff, because USC's canceled the series against Ole Miss. Georgia canceled its series against UCLA. This appetite for big non-conference games, I think, is waning. And so because of that, if we're going to see Lincoln Riley versus Kirby Smart, it's going to happen in the college football playoff. I think Kirby has a roster right now that can get there. I don't know that Lincoln Riley does, and I think that's why you're seeing him act with such desperation on the recruiting trail at this point.
Yeah, I think you might be on to something here. I think you said it best that Lincoln Riley is a very offensive-minded coach. The quarterbacks that he's produced are once-in-a-generation type talents. Kirby Smart, on the other hand, is more defensive-minded. And when you look at all the major players that have been involved in this, Bear Alexander, Justice Terry, Isaiah Gibson, Jaden Perlotti, they're all defensive players. So maybe you're right that Lincoln Riley realizes that that's what's been his weakness all along. It's never been about the offense. It's always been about the defense. So if CKS can spot this talent and see something in them, maybe that's what I can use to fix the problem that we have and get back to what we were supposed to be when they had Caleb Williams and they just couldn't pull it out because their defense couldn't stop anybody.
Right, and I think you look at some of the guys, Bear Alexander was not exactly a culture fit here at Georgia. Obviously, Georgia would have loved to keep him. That goes without saying. But when he left, there weren't exactly a lot of people that were all that upset that he was on his way out of the program. Jaden Perlotti, while yes, he wasn't one of the longest tenured commitments in this Georgia class.
It shouldn't be
I don't think it was a surprise. Yeah, it's a surprise from no one that he ultimately flips here, and just that he ultimately ends up at USC. So the guys that they're going after, I think, if they're able to land a Justice Terry, if they're able to land Elijah Griffin, that's when it really starts to change. And you give USC their credit and you take note of them on the recruiting trail. But if you're going to flip Gibson and if you're going to earn an early commitment from Gibson, you're going to flip Justice Terry. If you ultimately don't close on them and they end up at Georgia anyway, well, then what was the point of pushing for their early commitments and doing that? Because, it doesn't help USC because it ends up giving them with egg on their face. And with Georgia, it's just like, okay, cool, we're still going to end up with these guys at the end you're not worth really worrying about. So for USC, it's paramount that they try and close successfully with either a Justice Terry or with an Elijah Griffin there.
Coming up in just a minute, we're going to take a look at how Coach Kirby Smart is still making time for dogs in the Olympics. And then we're going to compete in our first ever Dawg Olympics. This is DawgNation at Large. Here at DawgNation, we know there is nothing better than Georgia's first game, especially when it's an opponent like Clemson. But as someone who's lived in Atlanta for the last 6 years, I know that getting to Atlanta could be a hassle. Whether it's hotel, parking, or traffic, it's a pain, and that's the last thing we want you to worry about for the opener. So DawgNation is here to help, along with our partners at Discover Dunwoody. If you've got tickets to the game, Discover Dunwoody will take care of everything else. Their VIP package includes 1 night at the Hyatt Place perimeter, luxury round-trip transportation to the DawgNation tailgate, and a one-of-a-kind swag bag that includes an exclusive DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. So let Discover Dunwoody get you to the big game and back in style. For a stress-free weekend, you can register at atlsportstrips.com. Again, that's atlsportstrips.com. I know her. That was okay. Yeah, we're getting excited for that DawgNation invasion at Clemson, but we do want to talk about this. Nick Fink, a UGA alum, won the silver medal in the 100-meter breaststroke in his post-event interview with Maria Taylor. She had a big surprise for him. Let's take a look at it.
Tight. I got to make sure I'm recording the surprise, and we're going to hope that the surprise on the other end actually does what he's supposed to do. You ready?
Maria!
What's goody? I have a surprise for you.
Uh-oh.
Hey! How's it going? Go Dogs!
Go Dogs! Silver medalists. We're so pumped.
Thank you. Wow, this is very cool. Thanks so much.
You can hold it. You can hold it. He just wanted to say congratulations.
I was a breaststroker back in high school. I was pumped, man.
Oh, yeah? Well, I'm happy to continue on that legacy then, the Georgia breaststroke legacy.
There's a saying in girl world that says if he wanted to, he would. And Kirby Smart wanted to answer that call. I think that was the biggest shocker out of all is how quick he answered that.
Yeah, it works out. You know, the time change, I believe they're 6 hours ahead there in Paris. So Kirby Smart was ready to answer the call. Credit to him. An unbelievably cool moment for Nick Fink, though. I would point out, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. One, he's about to become a dad, but two, his wife is also a former Georgia swimmer. However, while Nick Fink took home silver, his wife took home gold in the 2016 Olympics. And so while he has to be elated, an all-time great accomplishment in what is probably so far maybe the Olympic event of the Paris Games so far, the difference between first place and fourth place was 8/100ths of a second. For as great as that was for Nick Fink to tie for silver, he's going to come home and have to live with the fact that his wife has a gold and he's only got a silver.
Oh, yeah. If I'm his wife, I'm never living that down. Every argument's going to end with, well, I have a gold medal. But also, we learned that Kirby Smart, high school swimmer, also did the breaststroke. I did not see that out of him.
You know, as a former high school swimmer myself.
Oh, really?
The discipline required to be a good breaststroker is something that I did not lack. I was more of a pure power guy with the butterfly, but credit to Kirby. And, you know, I'm sure there's something that helped him about breaststroke that has turned him into the coach that he is today.
I cannot believe that we have never discussed your swimming history on this show. I can't believe that's never come up. What's the key?
Keep it brief and
What's
short.
the key? No, we got to dive into this now. What's the key to being a good swimmer? I've personally never been a great one.
I don't know about good swimmer, but a capable one. Like you just have to be wired differently. Like getting a chance to watch Katie Ledecky win the 1500 meter free, like 30 laps of 50 meters in a pool, just the monotony and where your mind has to be locked in there to push yourself for that length of time, whether it be a short event or a long event. It's just some incredible mental discipline and mental toughness. And so to have that, I think there is some crossover there with football. I was always training for football during the summer while I was swimming. But these athletes are so incredible. I have the utmost respect for them. It's why Michael Phelps is the GOAT Olympian in my mind. Just what's required to be that in the pool where, you know, you're in your own head when you're underwater and it is just you. You know, there's no crowd. There's nothing there. It is just you, silence in a pool. And so being able to push yourself to your absolute maximum in the biggest stage is just so unbelievably cool. And it was awesome to see Nick Fink come home with a silver medal because of it.
Yeah, I told you last week that I had heard rumors that Kirby was a Katie Ledecky fan, and now knowing what we know with him being a former swimmer as well, it makes a lot more sense to me. So
I mean, I never questioned. I mean, how could you not be a fan of Katie Ledecky? Are there those people out there?
That's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. I just thought it was a little bit random. But with that, since we are still in prime time Olympics and I've spent an absolutely embarrassing, it's not even embarrassing, I've spent a lot of time watching the Olympics, we thought it would be cool to do our first ever Dawg Olympics. And no, YouTube, that is not the official music of the Olympics, in case you were wondering. Basically, what we're going to do today, we each picked 3 players from the current UGA roster to participate in certain Olympic events. Lots of room for creativity today. Doesn't nearly have to make sense. You just have to defend your argument. So I'll actually go. I'm going to go first, and then we'll let Connor go, and we'll just go back and forth. I would like to take this first just because I thought that this might be where the crossover happened. Give me Oscar Delp in the 400-meter hurdles. I have seen this man attempt to do the No, let me have my moment here, okay? Listen, I've seen the guy do it before. He gets up there. I don't think that he necessarily has the speed to do the 100-meter hurdles, but hey, 400 could be anyone's game. So I'm taking Oscar Delp here in the 400-meter hurdles.
I took Oscar Delp, but I took him in a different event. I took him straight in the high jump. We're just trying to get maximum height here. We're not trying to do distance or speed or anything like that. I think Brock Bowers might perhaps be a better 400-meter hurdles guy, but he's obviously no longer on the team. I think just the high jump, he loves to jump. He loves to try and hurdle duels, even though he maybe shouldn't. And so the high jump, where you were specifically asked to just jump as high as you can, I think is the perfect jump for Mr. Delp.
Like the one, not the one with the pole. That's the one where you have to like go on your back and like.
That's pole vaulting.
No, I know. That's not the one I'm talking about. You're saying
high jump, yeah.
The one where you have to like kind of get on your back. Okay. I mean, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, they're both, involved jumping. But hurdles, I think, requires a little bit more speed for Mr. Delp, whereas I think just pure height.
That's why I went 400 and not 100. All right. You just gave one of yours, so I'll go ahead and go to my next one. Some wordplay here. Give me Gunnar Stockton in any shooting event when you've got gun in your name. I mean, and he's from Northeast Georgia. I imagine that they might do that for fun around there.
He's done some hunting, we've seen.
He's definitely done some hunting before. So give me Gunnar Stockton in any of the shooting events, because with a name like Gunnar, how are you not going to be a shooter that shoots? You know what I'm saying?
I like that. That's a good one.
Thank you.
I give you some credit there. I took a layup here. I went with Arian Smith. He is the fastest player on Georgia's team. He has run track at Georgia. I think if you wanted to, there's maybe a world where he is potentially an Olympian. But I took Arian Smith in the 100 meters. Easy peasy, no lost sleep there.
You actually asked me last week if I could be a gold medalist in any event, what would it be? And I said gymnastics. But I actually really sat down and thought about this. And I wish I would have said the 100-meter sprint, because to be like the fastest woman or fastest man in the whole world, I mean, that's pretty awesome. And it's short distance. So I'm glad that you took this here. Somebody had to do it. I'm going to give you my last one. And no, his current injury does not change how I feel about this. Give me Cole Spear in the javelin throw. Cole Spear throwing a spear. He's got a foot injury. He can still throw that thing. I feel like what I was telling the guys in the booth, what Cash Jones is to Cody, Cole Spear is to me. So wanted to make sure that he got some airtime on today's DawgNation at Large. Connor, bring it on home.
North Georgia's finest there, Cole Spear. I actually also had the javelin event, but I had someone who actually throws things for a living. I went with Carson Beck there. I think the power, I think the placement makes it all too easy to pick Carson Beck there in the javelin.
Okay. That's fine. Cole Spear and Carson Beck head-to-head in the javelin throw. Maybe we can put that out into the world and see if it'll happen. With that, we're going to end the show our favorite way. Connor, go ahead and tell me what you learned today.
I learned that Georgia might have a player at the walk-on wide receiver position. Jeremy Bell. This is a name maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't. I know Kaylee's not going to like this because he is a South Georgia native. But Jeremy Bell, a freshman wide receiver from Clinch County down there in Homerville. Look, I'm not saying he's going to lead Georgia in receiving. I'm not saying he's going to be the next Lad McConkey or anything like that. But this is a guy who at that wide receiver position has some real juice. And, with Rara Thomas being out, They've only got 10 scholarship players at that wide receiver position. They're going to ask some of these young guys to go up and make some plays. I know Jacoby White has earned some praise this offseason, but Jeremy Bell, just tuck that away in the back of your mind. He's got some sick dunks from his high school basketball days. This guy is an unreal athlete, and I think a real steal that Georgia picked up.
3-star or unranked?
I believe he is unranked, but it might depend on what recruiting service you prefer to use.
Hey, that's even better. I feel like if Kirby's going to get a guy that's under the radar, the entire world should be scared. So I like that for what you learned today. DawgNation, thank you again for joining us on DawgNation at Large. So glad to be back in our normal Thursday slot, and we will see you right back here next week. Have a good weekend, y'all.